Okay, so it's time to get some practice with Git Diff. There are two very important announcements or notes about this exercise up front. First of all, this exercise actually involves an existing repository that you're going to download. So stay tuned for those instructions in just a moment. And second, the other important note is that all these different variations that I'm asking you to use in these different steps here, you may not remember them all off the top of your head. I wouldn't blame you if you don't. So don't feel like, we've talked about adding and committing and branching. Those are like fundamental things you do day to day. Diffing, you may do frequently, but maybe not every flavor of Git Diff. So I would say it's just not as crucial. If you struggle to remember some of these, I wouldn't feel bad, but make sure you can get the answers. Make sure you understand, what command does what, even if you can't recall it instantly. It's fine to look things up. Anyway, like all the other exercises, there's a link in the resources for this video. I definitely recommend you open it up because in order to get started with this project, with this exercise, it's not really a project, you're going to need to do something we have not yet seen. This is actually skipping ahead. We're going to learn about a Git command once we get to GitHub called git clone. So all that I'll say about it for now is that as part of the setup for this exercise, you need to copy this link or copy this entire line. So I'm going to do that right now. And then we're going to run this from our terminal. And we're going to make sure we're not in a Git repository when we do this, because this is actually going to make a copy of a Git repo that I've made. It's going to make a copy for you on your machine. So let's try it. I'll do it right here. So I'm not in a Git repository right now. And I'm going to run this command. I just copied it. I don't want those. When I copied it, I don't want the little marks there. Okay, so now I'm going to hit enter. And we get this output from Git. Again, we're going to learn about this command later, but I now have a new folder called Git Diff Exercise. So now I'm going to cd into that. That's the next step. Change into that directory. So cd into Git Diff Exercise, and you'll see two files in here. So I can open this, code dot, just open it in VS Code. And here we go, we have two files. One for fleetwoodmac.txt, band Fleetwood Mac, and then another one for Queen, the band Queen. Now, the way that this exercise works is that there are actually two branches. The current branch that you're on by default is called current. Now, I recognize it's kind of confusing. What I meant is that this is the branch for the current lineups, the modern 2021, 2022 lineups of these bands. But there's a second branch that I've made already, and you can access it by running this command, git switch 1970s. So I'll do that now. And it is kind of weird. You're not going to see this branch, which is why I'm having you run this. If you run git branch, we don't see a second branch. We will learn why that is. So I'm not going to go into that until we get to GitHub and remote branches. But anyway, just follow these steps blindly. It's okay. We will learn. So now I have two branches, okay? 1970s and current. I made both of those ahead of time for you. Now you have them on your machine if you followed these steps. So if we look at the 1970s branch, that's what I'm on right now, we have some slight changes. For example, the Queen file now has Freddie Mercury as its singer. Fleetwood Mac has a different lineup. No keyboardist back in 1970. Now, this band, Fleetwood Mac, has had like a million lineup changes, and this is not entirely faithful, but the point is that there's two versions of each file, two branches. Each branch has the same two file names, but different contents. So now that we have that set up, we now have our diffs, the actual exercise portion. So there are a bunch of steps where I'm asking you to make different comparisons between the 1970s branch and the current branch for all files, between the 1970s branch and the current branch, but only for the queen.txt file. Or switch over to this current branch, that's the name of it, and run a diff to compare the current head to the previous commit. Basically, there's a bunch of diffs I'm asking you to run. Every one will involve a flavor of git diff. Now, towards the end, I actually ask you to make some changes to a file. Follow these directions pretty carefully. For example, here I'm telling you to replace Adam Lambert's name with your own name. Save the change, add to the staging area. So add that change, but do not commit. So that sort of thing is important because it enables us to, run different diffs where some changes are staged, some are not staged, and some are committed. Anyway, Follow these instructions if you'd like. I hope you do this exercise. We're going to make some comparisons between the different band lineups over the years, and stop watching at this point because I'm now just going to go through it myself. So I did part 1. I have this repository. I have these 2 branches, right? 1970s and current. Now the first exercise, the first problem, is to compare the difference between the 1970s branch and the current branch across all files. So I can do that with git diff and then just 2 branch names. So I didn't specify which one you should compare first. Remember that the order matters, but I'll just say 1970s compared to now. Chronologically, that makes more sense because, well, let me just show you. We see, for example, what's changed. Like currently in Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey Buckingham is no longer part of the band, sadly, and he's been replaced. So this format makes sense, in my opinion, where we have, the old is the actual chronologically older branch, and the new is the current branch, but it doesn't matter. So we also see, keyboard was set to none on the 1970s branch. There was no keyboard player. And now in the current branch, it's Christine McVie. And we also see the changes in the Queen file. Now the second part of the exercise is to do the same thing, but only for the queen.txt file. So still compare the 2 branches, but I can narrow it down just like that as a third value. Just give me that one file. And here we are. What's changed? Well, Freddie Mercury exists in the 1970s branch. Adam Lambert is in the current branch. Mike Gross is in the 1970s branch, and Neil Fairclough, I don't know. He's a new addition to the band, actually. What's his name? Roger Deacon, I think was his name, was the main bassist of the band, but he's actually not part of it anymore. So he kind of got lost between 1970s and 2021. But we don't have a middle branch. Anyway, next up, step 3, switch over to the current branch if you're not on it currently. So I'll do that. I'm on the 1970s branch, git switch to current. And then it says, run a diff to compare the current head to the previous commit. Basically, if we do a git log, I want to see what happened between where we are right now, this is head, and this commit. So there are multiple ways of doing this. I mean, I could copy these commit hashes and do a diff between them, or I could just say, what's the difference? So git diff between head and then the prior commit, the parent of head tilde 1. And this is what changed in that commit. I changed the bassist, John Deacon. I think I said Roger Deacon. It's John Deacon. Anyway, I updated him. He left the band and was replaced by this guy. So the way that I've written this right now is that we're looking at head compared to head tilde 1. I would probably do it this way instead, like this, so that we can see what was added in the newest commit and what was removed, right? It's the same change. It's just the order was slightly different. But you could also get that commit hash, as I mentioned. So we could just copy part of that hash for the whole thing and do a git diff compared to that. So this is the same thing as this. And then here we're just flipping the order. So this is comparing head tilde 1 to head, and this is comparing head to head tilde 1. So the new commit to the parent, or the parent commit to the child. Okay, the next step. While on the current branch, change the queen.txt file by replacing Adam Lambert with your own name, save the change, add that file to the staging area, do not commit. Okay, so let's try that. I'm going to change Adam Lambert and put my own name, Colt Steele, and I'm going to save. And then I will just run git status. I will add that file. I'll stage it like the instructions say, but I'm not going to commit. Okay, now edit the Fleetwood Mac file, changing the lead singer from Stevie Nicks to Stevie Chicks. One of my chickens is Stevie Chicks. So we'll save that file, but we're not going to stage it. So Stevie Nicks becomes Stevie Chicks. And I saved it, but I'm not going to stage that. Okay, now we get to do some more diffs. Run a diff that reveals the unstaged changes in the working directory, so I should only see the change that we made to fleetwoodmac.txt. So what is the command I can do to view that? Well, it's going to be git diff something. And if actually it's just git diff. So git diff on its own is going to show me, in this case, the unstaged changes. it's not going to show me the changes that I already staged, right? To do that, that's the next little bit here. Run a diff that would reveal only the stage changes. So I should only see that change we made to queen.txt. I should see my name. So how do I do that? Well, it's going to be another get diff, but we need -- staged or cached. And there we are. We see Colt Steele, or whatever your name is, replacing Adam Lambert. And then finally, run a diff that prints all changes, both files that we changed, the stage file and the unstaged file, since the prior commit. So we can do git diff head. So take current working directory, staged and unstaged changes, compare that to the head commit. So here's what changed in Fleetwood Mac, and here's what changed in Queen. Okay, so I know this was kind of a tedious exercise, but I had to try and come up with something that you could follow along with and try and run some diffs on your own and get some practice with the different commands. I don't know how successful this was, but I hope you followed along and enjoyed it. Don't get hung up on this bit around git clone and how this all works. We will be spending a lot of time on that later on. This just enabled me to give you some starter code or files and branches so you could just get going with the diffs. All right, moving on.